Let's begin. But first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth. The Harper residence gleamed under the warm glow of chandeliers, every corner reflecting wealth, luxury, and meticulous taste. Crystal vases overflowed with fresh flowers, golden accents shimmered on polished surfaces, and the soft strains of a live string quartet filled the grand ballroom. Guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos mingled, their laughter and chatter weaving a tapestry of sophistication and elegance. At the center of it all stood David Harper, a man whose wealth and charm had earned him admiration and envy in equal measure. His smile was effortless, his posture commanding, and every word he spoke carried the subtle weight of influence. To the outside world, his life seemed flawless, a perfect marriage, a thriving career, and the air of success that surrounded him wherever he went. Isabella Harper moved gracefully among the guests, her flowing gown emphasizing the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. She greeted friends and acquaintances with soft smiles and polite nods, her voice calm and measured, yet beneath her composed exterior, a quiet tension simmered. Though she radiated elegance and warmth, there was an unmistakable loneliness in her eyes. David's attention was scattered, his interactions with her perfunctory, as though her presence were merely a formality rather than a priority. The small gestures she longed for, a reassuring glance, a gentle touch, a whispered word of affection, were missing, leaving her to navigate the glittering crowd with poise alone. The house, grand as it was, felt cold and impersonal, and the luxury surrounding her only highlighted the emotional distance she endured night after night. Vanessa Cole's entrance added an immediate ripple of tension beneath the party's polished surface. With her confident strides, perfectly styled hair, and a knowing smile, she commanded attention effortlessly. She lingered near David, laughing at his jokes and leaning in with an air of familiarity that unsettled Isabella more than anyone could see. The subtle glances exchanged between Vanessa and David, though outwardly charming, were loaded with unspoken implications. Guests whispered discreetly, sensing the electric undercurrent of drama beneath the glittering surface. Isabella felt the weight of the evening pressing on her chest. She reminded herself to remain graceful, to smile, to navigate the social intricacies as she always had, yet a gnawing unease lingered. Every time David's gaze lingered too long on Vanessa, or every time he dismissed her softly spoken words, a subtle ache of betrayal and neglect surfaced. Beneath the sparkle of the party, behind the laughter and the music, the fragile balance of appearances teetered precariously. The night promised glamour and elegance to the outside world, but for Isabella, it was a reminder of the hidden fractures in her life, a foreshadowing of the humiliation and heartbreak that was soon to unfold. Vanessa Cole moved through the Harper ballroom with the kind of confidence that demanded attention, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she surveyed the crowd. Every gesture was calculated, every laugh carefully pitched to draw eyes. She approached David with an exaggerated, playful smile, leaning in just enough to make the air between them charged with familiarity. Her hand brushed against his arm, a touch so casual to some, so provocative to others, and she whispered something that made him laugh, the sound carrying across the room. Guests turned subtly to watch, some intrigued, some shocked, all captivated by the tension she generated effortlessly. Isabella stood nearby, holding a glass of champagne in both hands, trying to maintain composure. She felt a flicker of discomfort each time Vanessa laughed too loudly or leaned a little too close to David. The whispers of the other guests were faint but not unnoticed, subtle remarks, exchanged glances, and half-hidden smirks hinted at the brewing drama. Vanessa was skilled at turning charm into weaponry. She drew the attention of the room and, by contrast, made Isabella seem small, almost invisible. Each carefully timed laugh and playful gesture was designed to undermine, to dominate, and Isabella felt it keenly, though she kept her expression calm and polite. Vanessa noticed the effect she was having. The way heads turned, the way some guests whispered behind their hands, the way David's own smile seemed wider when she was nearby, all of it fed her confidence. She moved like a predator in plain sight, each step, each tilt of the head, designed to assert control over the social dynamic. A guest attempted to strike up conversation with Isabella, but Vanessa's presence was magnetic, the room's energy shifted toward her. It was subtle chaos, an invisible disruption that Isabella could sense but could not openly confront. Isabella's heart raced as she tried to navigate the delicate balance of etiquette and self-respect. She smiled politely, nodded at guests, and offered soft words, all while feeling the sting of disrespect. Vanessa's actions were deliberate, a challenge wrapped in charm, and Isabella sensed that something worse was yet to come. Each glance David spared to Vanessa was a reminder that loyalty and attention were slipping away, leaving Isabella exposed in a room full of people. The tension was palpable, a quiet storm ready to break. Isabella's mind raced as she anticipated the consequences of this display. She felt the collective gaze of the party on her, the subtle mockery hidden behind polite smiles, and the unspoken knowledge that Vanessa was enjoying every moment of her subtle destruction. The stage was set. What began as a quiet undermining of presence, a play of charm and arrogance, was leading inevitably toward the night's infamous act, the moment that would leave Isabella humiliated and change the course of the evening forever. The air in the Harper ballroom, already thick with tension, seemed to tighten with each passing second. Guests lingered near the dessert table, their laughter masking the unease that simmered beneath polite conversation. Vanessa Cole held a small plate with the birthday cake, her fingers deliberately lingering over its edges, as if savoring the anticipation of what she was about to do. Her eyes, sharp and gleaming with mischief, scanned the room before settling on Isabella. The pregnant woman, radiant yet vulnerable in her elegant gown, stood near the center of the room, greeting guests with polite smiles. To Vanessa, it was the perfect stage, and Isabella the perfect target. Vanessa's approach was slow, calculated, almost theatrical. Each step brought her closer to Isabella, her posture a mixture of casual confidence and deliberate menace. The guests, initially unaware of her intentions, began to sense the charged energy, glancing curiously at the two women. Isabella, still unaware, continued to engage with the crowd, her laughter soft and measured, her composure a fragile shield against the undercurrent of unease. Vanessa reached out, brushing a hand gently against Isabella's arm under the pretense of congratulation or jest, and in that brief contact, Isabella felt a subtle ripple of something wrong, but it was too late to react. With a swift, almost imperceptible motion, Vanessa lifted the cake and flung it toward Isabella. The dessert arced through the air, an unexpected projectile that struck Isabella squarely across the chest. The room fell into a split-second silence, a moment suspended in shock and disbelief. Then came the laughter, sharp, cruel, and unrestrained. Some guests gasped, some whispered, but the majority erupted into amusement at Isabella's expense. The sound was deafening to her ears, a chorus of mockery and derision that amplified the humiliation. Isabella froze, the shock rendering her momentarily speechless. Her gown was smeared with frosting, her hair disheveled, and the cake had left its mark not just on her appearance but on her dignity. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for compassion, for a familiar face, for any sign that someone might intervene, but the laughter continued, and David's expression, conflicted though it was, offered no immediate solace. The social betrayal stung as much as the physical mess. The people she considered friends had allowed themselves to be entertained by cruelty. A wave of emotional turmoil crashed over her. Embarrassment, hurt, and disbelief collided with the persistent awareness of her pregnancy, making her feel exposed and vulnerable in ways she had never experienced. The act was more than a prank, it was a declaration of disrespect, a public undermining of her status, her dignity, and the sacred trust of her marriage. Every laugh, every pointing finger, every whispered comment deepened the chasm between her and the life she had thought was secure. Yet beneath the shock, a quiet ember of resolve began to burn. Isabella realized that the laughter of others, the mockery of Vanessa, and even the initial absence of David's support could not define her. The moment of public humiliation was crushing, but it was also a turning point, a cruel awakening that would reveal the strength she had carried silently within her all along. In that instant, amidst frosting and laughter, Isabella's resilience began to emerge, setting the stage for the confrontation, the emotional reckoning, and the justice that was yet to unfold. Isabella stood frozen, her chest heaving slightly as she tried to comprehend the scene that had just unfolded. The cold frosting clung to her gown, sticky and humiliating, yet the sting of embarrassment was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. The room was alive with laughter, loud, cruel, and unrestrained, a chorus that seemed to mock her very existence. Every chuckle and whispered comment felt like a personal betrayal, as though the people she had trusted to celebrate alongside her were now complicit in the cruelty. Her hands trembled, but she clenched them at her sides, forcing herself to remain upright, to keep her composure despite the emotional torrent swirling within her. Shock still gripped her mind, a surreal fog that made every movement feel both distant and immediate at the same time. She remembered the moments leading up to the party, the careful preparation, the polite greetings she had offered, and the genuine effort she had made to maintain her grace. None of it mattered now. The laughter, Vanessa's smug expression, and the amused glances from the guests were a brutal reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that social admiration could turn into ridicule in a heartbeat. The realization cut deeper than the frosting on her gown. It was a stark acknowledgement of the fragility of respect and the ease with which it could be stripped away. Pain mingled with rising anger, a combustible combination that made her cheeks flush not just with embarrassment but with the fire of indignation. She felt every ounce of betrayal acutely, from Vanessa's deliberate cruelty, from David's failure to intervene, and from the audience who had chosen amusement over empathy. Each laugh felt like a tiny betrayal, each whispered comment like a knife twisting in her heart. But beneath the initial shock, something else began to stir, a quiet, simmering awareness that her dignity was hers to uphold, regardless of public opinion. No amount of ridicule, no wave of gossip, could strip away the essence of who she was. Slowly, Isabella's breaths became steadier, her hands unclenching as her mind began to clear. She could feel the emotional power shifting inside her, a subtle but unmistakable assertion of strength. She reminded herself that the humiliation, though public and visible, did not define her worth. The laughter around her, the mocking glances, the whispers of gossip, they were ephemeral, fleeting, and inconsequential compared to the integrity she carried quietly within herself. As the minutes stretched, the shock gradually transformed into resolve. Isabella straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and allowed a calm expression to settle over her features, masking the storm of emotions within. The room continued to swirl with chatter and amusement, but she no longer felt the need to seek validation from anyone there. The cruel act and the laughter it inspired had awakened a core strength, a realization that she could withstand betrayal and public mockery with poise. In that moment, Isabella's emotional armor began to form, a protective layer that would carry her through the party, through the night, and toward the eventual reckoning that justice, and her own dignity, would demand. David Harper stood frozen for a moment, his mouth slightly agape, as the reality of the scene sank in. The laughter, the whispers, and the pointed glances of the guests all seemed to converge into a sharp, almost tangible weight pressing against his chest. For the first time that evening, he felt the unmistakable sting of embarrassment, not for himself, but for the chaos that had erupted under his roof. He had invited admiration, elegance, and celebration, yet what unfolded was far from the image of refinement he had so carefully curated. His heart raced, a mixture of anger, confusion, and the faintest hint of guilt gnawing at him, though he struggled to fully acknowledge it. Isabella, meanwhile, had regained her composure. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and her calm expression betrayed none of the turmoil that had just surged through her. The guests' amusement now seemed almost irrelevant to her. What mattered was the quiet assertion of dignity she carried within herself. Her eyes met David's briefly, a subtle reminder of the bond he had jeopardized, and a silent assertion that she would not allow the humiliation to define her. Each step she took, each polite nod to those around her, contrasted sharply with Vanessa's brazen confidence and self-satisfied smirk. The mistress, still basking in the initial thrill of her cruelty, had not yet realized that the very act intended to dominate the room had set in motion a chain of consequences she could not control. Whispers spread rapidly, the social fallout beginning to take shape almost immediately. Some guests exchanged knowing glances, while others glanced at Vanessa with a mixture of amusement and judgment. The initial laughter began to waver under the subtle scrutiny of society's ever-watchful eye. David's reputation, long meticulously maintained, was now on unstable ground, not because of scandalous gossip alone, but because the values he had failed to uphold, the lack of protection for his wife, were now painfully evident. The consequences, though not yet overt, had begun their quiet work. Vanessa's arrogance and sense of invincibility started to falter as she sensed the shift. The energy of the room, once entirely under her influence, was subtly tilting. Guests no longer laughed as freely, some eyes were filled with judgment, some with sympathy for Isabella, and others with an unspoken recognition that cruelty, however charmingly packaged, carried repercussions. Karma, subtle but unmistakable, was threading itself through the evening. Isabella felt it too, a quiet satisfaction blooming within her. The humiliation she had endured had inadvertently exposed Vanessa's recklessness and arrogance. While Vanessa had sought power through mockery, Isabella's quiet strength and grace now cast a contrasting light that highlighted the mistress's flaws. In that moment, the turning point became undeniable. The seeds of poetic justice had been planted, and the night that began with ridicule and cruelty was already beginning to shift toward a reckoning that would leave consequences inescapable for those who had misjudged dignity, patience, and strength. The shift in the room was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew with each passing minute. Vanessa, who had strutted through the Harper ballroom with the air of invincibility, now felt a tightening in her chest, a creeping unease that refused to be ignored. Whispers, once hidden behind polite smiles, became more pointed, carrying a weight of judgment she could no longer escape. Guests who had been charmed by her confidence now exchanged knowing glances, quietly acknowledging the cruelty that had unfolded. The power she had wielded so effortlessly, the influence she thought unassailable, was unraveling before her eyes. David's initial embarrassment had transformed into subtle indignation. He confronted a few close associates, attempting to steer the conversation away from Vanessa's antics, but the truth had already spread. A guest, discreet but firm, mentioned Vanessa's prior manipulations and small lies that had surfaced over the course of the evening. Each revelation chipped away at her social armor, exposing the arrogance that had masked insecurity for so long. Her carefully constructed image of dominance and charm faltered, replaced by a growing awareness that her actions had consequences she had not anticipated. Vanessa's smile, once so assured, began to falter. The laughter that had followed her cake-throwing now echoed differently, no longer amusing, but critical, tinged with disapproval. Guests who had been her audience, admiring her audacity, were now witnesses to her unraveling. The mistress who had sought to humiliate Isabella had inadvertently revealed herself as reckless and petty, and the admiration she had cultivated was dissolving before her very eyes. The sense of power she had relished was replaced with isolation and discomfort, as the social dynamics shifted subtly but unmistakably in Isabella's favor. Isabella, by contrast, held herself with quiet grace. She did not need to retaliate or seek attention, her dignity radiated naturally, amplified by the stark contrast with Vanessa's faltering composure. Each polite nod, each measured smile, was a silent assertion of her strength, a testament to the resilience she had cultivated in the face of humiliation. The partygoers, sensing this shift, now regarded Isabella with newfound respect. Sympathy, admiration, and quiet acknowledgement replaced the laughter that had once isolated her. In that moment, Vanessa's arrogance was exposed as fragile, and Isabella's quiet dignity shone through like a beacon. The night that had begun with cruelty and laughter at Isabella's expense now tilted irrevocably. The mistress, once so confident in her power, was humbled by the very actions she had orchestrated, while Isabella, unbroken and composed, emerged as the true victor. The balance had shifted, and social justice, subtle yet undeniable, had been served. Isabella stood tall, the remnants of frosting barely visible on her gown, but her composure flawless. The room, once filled with whispers of amusement at her expense, now held a quiet respect for the woman who had endured public humiliation with grace. Each glance she received from the guests carried admiration rather than mockery, a silent acknowledgement of her resilience and poise. Her pregnancy, the gentle curve of her belly beneath the elegant fabric, became a symbol of hope, continuity, and life moving forward despite the turbulence of the evening. She held herself not as a victim, but as someone who had claimed her dignity in the face of adversity. David, observing her from a distance, felt the weight of realization pressing heavily upon him. The night that had begun as indulgence, distraction, and selfish pleasure had transformed into a mirror reflecting his own failures. His neglect, his tolerance of Vanessa's audacity, and his failure to protect Isabella were no longer abstract missteps, they had tangible consequences. He saw clearly now how his actions had endangered the trust and respect that formed the foundation of their relationship. Guilt, sharp and unyielding, pierced him as he recognized that the evening's events could not simply be erased by apologies or excuses. Isabella's quiet strength contrasted sharply with David's growing awareness. While he wrestled with the moral and emotional fallout of his choices, she navigated the room with effortless grace. Her interactions were calm, measured, and confident. Her laughter, when it came, was genuine and unforced. She spoke to guests with warmth and clarity, subtly reinforcing her dignity and the respect she had earned. The very act of reclaiming her composure, of standing unbroken in front of a judgmental crowd, became a declaration of power that no one could undermine. The pregnancy she carried was a constant reminder of the life she protected and the future she envisioned. Each small movement, each gentle touch to her belly, reinforced her determination to prioritize love, safety, and stability above the chaos orchestrated by Vanessa and compounded by David's lapse in judgment. She had endured humiliation, witnessed betrayal, and yet emerged stronger, her integrity intact. By the end of the evening, the social dynamics had shifted irrevocably. Isabella's grace and resilience contrasted with Vanessa's humbled arrogance, while David, chastened and reflective, began to comprehend the depth of his errors. The night had been a harsh teacher, revealing who could endure humiliation with dignity and who could not withstand the consequences of selfishness. Isabella, pregnant and poised, had reclaimed her power, her respect, and her voice, embodying hope, strength, and an unshakable sense of self that would guide her and her child into a future defined not by betrayal, but by courage and integrity. Months had passed since the infamous party, yet the memory lingered in the minds of those who had attended. Vanessa Cole, once the center of attention and orchestrator of chaos, gradually faded from relevance. Invitations to social gatherings grew scarce, whispers of her arrogance and cruelty following her like shadows. The charm that had once seemed irresistible was now overshadowed by the realization of her recklessness. People who had once admired her confidence now regarded her with caution, and in her absence of influence, the emptiness of her actions became starkly evident. Isabella, in contrast, flourished quietly yet undeniably. Her elegance and poise had not only survived the public humiliation but had grown stronger because of it. Every gesture, every conversation, every smile she offered radiated dignity and self-assuredness. She moved through social circles not as a figure defined by tragedy, but as someone whose strength had been tested and proven. Her pregnancy became a beacon of hope and continuity, a living reminder of resilience in the face of cruelty. Friends and family admired not only the life she nurtured but the emotional fortitude she had cultivated through adversity. David, however, carried the weight of regret like an invisible chain. The choices he had made, the indulgence he had prioritized over loyalty, and the failure to defend the woman who stood by him had left an indelible mark. He replayed the night endlessly in his mind, the laughter, the whispers, Vanessa's smug triumph, and realized how close he had come to losing everything that truly mattered. The social repercussions, though less immediate now, mirrored the internal consequences, shame, guilt, and a newfound awareness of the depth of his failures. For the first time, he understood that wealth, charm, and appearances could never replace integrity, respect, and genuine love. The balance of life had shifted irrevocably. Isabella's dignity and strength contrasted sharply with Vanessa's faded prominence and David's humbled realization. The evening that had once seemed disastrous had become the crucible that revealed true character. Isabella had emerged as the embodiment of courage, justice, and moral clarity. She had taken control of her life and her child's future, demonstrating that resilience and self-respect could transform humiliation into empowerment. In the end, the moral was clear: cruelty and arrogance may bring temporary satisfaction, but integrity, patience, and strength endure. The night Vanessa sought to humiliate Isabella had instead illuminated the profound power of dignity, the justice of consequences, and the unshakable value of standing strong even when the world seems to laugh against you. Isabella's life, reborn from adversity, was now firmly in her hands, a testament to courage, grace, and the quiet triumph of the human spirit. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth.